A recent survey by CNA's Money Mind suggests a gap between Gen Z's attitudes towards jobs, savings and retirement and their actual financial behaviours. The survey polled 3,000 respondents aged between 21 and 28 across 6 countries. Angela Lim joins us in the studio to break it down all for us. Angela, thanks for joining me. Now, can you give us an idea, of what this survey tells us about, Gen Z's saving habits in Singapore and, what is their view towards financial freedom?
Yeah, well, Jen, among all the countries that were surveyed, Gen Z respondents in Singapore actually had the highest number that saved more than half their pay. And that number is 19%, which is higher than all the other Asian countries polled, which were mostly in the single digits. Now, the question is, why are Gen Zs in Singapore saving so much? Well, on one hand, you can see the average monthly pay in Singapore is higher generally than the other Asian countries. So it could explain why there's more to save. But take a look at the second statistic here, which is 54% of the respondents said they needed at least $1 million and above to be financially free by the time they're 55 years old. Okay. So 31% also said that they needed $1 to $1.5 million to be financially free by that same age. That is the highest in Asia as well. So it could also explain why Gen Zs are saving so much. Now let's take a look at this interesting third finding here, which is that Gen Zs in Singapore generally want to stay in the workforce for no more longer than 21 to 30 years left. So actually, if you do the quick math, they're about 21 to 28 years old now, the respondents, right? So that means they don't want to stay in the workforce on average for longer than they're 58 years old, which is 5 years younger than the official retirement age in Singapore. So how does all of this add up? I asked a financial expert, is Gen Z saving enough to be able to be financially free and retire when they say they want to? And here's what she had to say.
I do find this group of clients not saving enough for retirement, mainly because they are more hesitant in investing. Gen Z belongs to the population and the generation where they expect to earn a lot more income, but in a shorter period of time, because they grew up watching influencers and tech founders make money fast. So they expect to earn more, but in a shorter time. They will not work on the same expectation or timeline like the baby boomers or Gen X of working for 30 or 40 years to retirement. But in reality, most won't be able to save enough in just 20 years, especially if they plan to start a family. Many will still need to work 30 to 40 years to retire comfortably.
So we know about Gen Z's views on savings, and retirement. But what about the way they view work, right? The state of work for them. And how long are they willing to stay in one job?
Yeah, that's the big questions that all the employers are asking, right? How long is this Gen Z that I just hired going to stay in my company?
Right.
Well, the survey does give us quite a clear number, and that number is 2.9 years, which means Gen Z in Singapore don't want to stay in a job, ideally, for longer than 3 years. Yep. That is the lowest number in Asia. Right. Compare that with China, for example, which is the highest, and they clocked in 4.6 years. So that gap is quite a bit. I asked a jobs expert, why is it that Gen Zs in Singapore don't want to stay beyond 3 years at each job? Here's what he had to say.
First of all, almost 3 years is actually not such a short tenure. You have to understand that Gen Zers responding this will mean that this is their first job into the job market, right? What they're looking for is to really build, the experience and learn. And if they feel that they haven't really gained enough learning and enough exposure after 3 years, then they're more prone to change. I guess the comparison with other markets within the Asian region is actually quite interesting. And it does tell about, number one, how competitive as well as fluid the employment market in Singapore is, where it's very transparent. People are really career driven and they are looking to not being stagnant into their jobs, but really try to progress even faster than some of our neighboring countries.
Now, Jen, it's not just about growth and better job prospects. Gen Zs in Singapore also expected the highest starting monthly salary out of all the countries polled in Asia. 58% of them said they needed at least $5,000 as the starting salary, which could explain why many of the respondents, a majority of them actually, said that it was harder to find a job today than in previous generations. 71% agree or strongly agree that it's harder to find a job now.
Right. So they are looking for growth, they're looking for prospects and a higher starting salary. What else is important to a Gen Z job seeker?
The financials are definitely one of the most fundamental motivations for Gen Z. But at the same time, what's interesting is also how they place an emphasis compared to the other Asian countries on two factors. One is the work-life balance aspect. They do expect to have some kind of balance between their work and their personal time. The second part that they do tend to focus more on is also work flexibility, and specifically flexible work arrangements are quite important to Gen Zs in Singapore. So what does this all mean for employers? So I asked the jobs expert for some advice, and here's what he had to say.
Companies in Singapore definitely need to adjust not only their hiring practices, but also the way they're able to keep engaged and retain their talent. Those are significant changes that sometimes it doesn't need to be expensive for organizations. They don't need to invest new resources, but rather craft perhaps new career paths. So I think having clear learning and development opportunities for those millennials where they can learn new skills, where they can develop in their career, I guess map career paths, achieving certain milestones. If the organization is able to offer that, that will definitely keep Gen Z engaged in the company for a lot longer and provide ultimately a more meaningful and engaged type of working culture.
So as you can see, Jen, what this survey does is it gives us a lot more clarity on what Gen Zs are looking for when it comes to jobs, savings and retirement. And hopefully this, going forward with the advice from the experts as well, allows employers to better cater to their needs and also perhaps have a more fulfilling long-term relationship as well going forward.
All right, Angela, thanks for that. And that was Angela Lim breaking down the latest findings from the Money Mind survey on the spending habits of youths in Singapore.